Captain Velnara stood frozen at her command station, staring at the sensor data that made no sense. For 3 centuries, every spacefaring race in the galaxy knew one simple rule: stay away from Sol 3. The Coalition had classified it as an extinction level, death trap, a world so hostile that even their most advanced probes barely lasted hours on its surface. But now her instruments were telling her something impossible. Organized electromagnetic signals were coming from that cursed planet, not random noise or natural phenomena, but structured communications that could only mean one thing: intelligent life was somehow thriving down there. Run the diagnostics. Again. Velnara ordered her science officer Tordan, though they both knew the scanners had been checked 17 times already. The readings remained unchanged. Tordan's forearms moved across his control panels with practiced efficiency. His species, the Corellians, were known throughout the galaxy for their scientific precision. When a Corellian said something was impossible, other races listened. Commander, I've triple-checked every system. The signals are real, but they can't be. That world has atmospheric poison levels that would kill most Coalition species in minutes. The radiation alone should sterilize any complex life. The bridge fell silent as every crew member turned to look at the main display. Sol 3 hung before them like a blue-green marble wrapped in swirling white clouds. From a distance, it almost looked peaceful, beautiful even. But their computers told a different story entirely. The planet's weather systems were beyond violent. Storms larger than some of their homeworlds raged across its surface, with winds that could shred starship hulls. The atmospheric composition readings made Velnara's scales itch just thinking about it. 21% of some corrosive gas called oxygen that would burn through most species' respiratory systems like acid. Lieutenant Hayara, their communications specialist, spoke up from her station. Captain, I'm detecting multiple transmission sources. Whatever's down there, it's not just surviving, it's organized. There are communication networks spanning the entire planet. Velnara's mind raced. In her 40 years of space exploration, she had seen worlds that pushed the boundaries of habitability. Desert planets where the sand could melt metal. Ice worlds where the cold could freeze helium solid. Ocean worlds with crushing pressures that could compact a starship into a marble. But Sol 3 was different. It wasn't just hostile in one way. It was hostile in every conceivable way. The radiation readings alone should have made complex life impossible. Their instruments detected massive bursts of energy from the system's star that regularly bathed the planet in deadly particles. Any civilization would need underground bunkers and massive shielding just to survive a single solar flare. Yet the signal suggested surface-based activity across multiple continents. Sir, Tordan said quietly, the temperature variations are extreme. Parts of the planet swing from below freezing to temperatures that would boil water, sometimes in the same location within hours. No known species could adapt to such rapid changes. Velnara examined the geological data with growing disbelief. The planet's crust was unstable, constantly shifting and moving in ways that would trigger catastrophic earthquakes. Massive fissures in the ground spewed toxic gases and molten rock. Mountain ranges were actively growing and collapsing. It was as if the entire world was in a constant state of violent transformation. But perhaps most disturbing were the biological readings. Their long-range scanners detected massive life forms moving across the surface. Creatures that registered as apex predators with bite forces that could crush Coalition armor. The atmospheric analysis showed traces of countless toxins that these creatures apparently produced naturally. It was a world where everything had evolved to kill everything else. How long since the last Coalition survey? Velnara asked. 312 years, Captain. The survey team that classified it as extinction-class hostile barely escaped with their lives. Their report stated that Sol 3 was the most dangerous world they had ever encountered. Velnara read through the historical files. The original survey team had described Sol 3 as nature's perfect killing machine, a world that seemed designed to eliminate any form of complex life through every means possible. They had recommended permanent quarantine and had forbidden any future contact attempts. Yet here they were, detecting clear signs of not just life, but technological civilization. The captain looked around at her mixed-species crew. Corellians, Vorthan, Zalaki, and Hearn, representatives of 4 different worlds, each adapted to their own unique environments. But none of their homeworlds came close to the hostility of Sol 3. She was asking them to descend into what every expert in the Yo galaxy considered certain death. "Prepare the landing shuttle," Velnara said finally. "If we're walking into our graves, at least we'll solve the greatest mystery in Coalition space." Her crew exchanged looks of resignation mixed with curiosity. They all knew this was likely a one-way mission. But the alternative, returning to Coalition space with impossible sensor readings and no answers, was unthinkable. Whatever was broadcasting from Sol 3 had already rewritten everything they thought they knew about survival in the universe. The shuttle, Pioneer's Hope, shuddered violently as it entered Sol 3's atmosphere. Captain Velnara gripped her command chair while warning lights bathed the cabin in angry red pulses. Every alarm system they had was screaming at once, creating a symphony of electronic panic that made her head throb. "Hull temperature rising beyond safe parameters," announced their shuttle's AI in its maddeningly calm voice. "Atmospheric corrosion detected. Estimated equipment failure in 4 hours, 17 minutes. Lieutenant Hyara struggled with her controls as turbulence threw them around like a toy. "Captain, these aren't just storms, they're atmospheric weapons. Wind speeds are hitting 300 kilometers per hour. The lightning strikes are carrying enough electrical charge to power a space station." Through the viewports, Velnara watched in fascination and terror as massive bolts of electricity arced between towering cloud formations. Each lightning strike was brighter than their ship's fusion engines and lasted several seconds longer than should be physically possible. The storm wasn't just violent, it was impossibly violent, as if the planet's weather systems operated by different laws of physics. Tordan's 4 hands flew across his sensor array, his usually steady voice cracking with disbelief. "The atmospheric composition is worse than our worst projections. This oxygen compound, it's everywhere. 21% concentration. At these levels, it should be burning through our hull right now." The Corellian scientist had good reason to be terrified. His species breathed a noble gas mixture that was completely inert. The idea of breathing something as reactive as oxygen was like voluntarily inhaling acid to him. Their environmental suits were designed for exploration, not chemical warfare. As they descended through the storm, their instruments painted an even more terrifying picture. The rain wasn't just water, it was loaded with dissolved minerals and compounds that registered as industrial solvents. Each droplet hitting their hull was slowly eating away at their protective coating. The very air around them was thick with microscopic particles that would clog their filtration systems within hours. Emergency landing protocols engaged, the AI announced as their shuttle bucked and twisted through air so thick and violent, it felt like flying through liquid metal. "Seeking suitable landing zone." Velnara almost laughed at the absurdity. There were no suitable landing zones on a death world. Every square meter of this planet was actively trying to kill them. The shuttle touched down with a jarring impact that rattled every bolt and weld. Immediately, their environmental systems began working overtime, cycling air through purification systems that were already showing signs of strain. The atmospheric readings outside were beyond anything their equipment was designed to handle. "Suit integrity at 92% and falling," reported Chief Engineer Kess, a Vorthan whose species specialized in environmental protection technology. "The corrosive atmosphere is attacking the molecular bonds in our protective gear. We have maybe 6 hours before complete suit failure." 6 hours. On most worlds, that would be plenty of time to complete a survey and return to orbit. Here it felt like a death sentence with a timer. But before they could even begin discussing retreat options, their external cameras detected movement. Through the chaos of the storm, shapes were approaching their landing site. Bipedal figures, moving with purpose across terrain that should have been impossible to navigate. "Contact," whispered Hyara, her voice barely audible over the storm's roar. "Multiple beings approaching. They're not wearing protective gear." Velnara stared at the display in disbelief. The figures moving toward them were completely exposed to the deadly atmosphere. No environmental suits, no breathing apparatus, no protective shielding of any kind. They walked through the poisonous rain as if it were a gentle spring shower. The lead figure raised what appeared to be a limb in greeting. Through their suit's communication system, a voice came through speaking perfect coalition standard with an accent none of them could identify. "Welcome to Earth," the being said, and Velnara could hear what sounded like genuine warmth in the tone. "I'm Jinho. You picked quite a rough day for a visit, but don't worry. This storm should pass in about an hour." The casual way this Jinho creature discussed the catastrophic weather made Velnara's blood run cold. Their instruments registered the storm as powerful enough to level cities, yet this being spoke of it like a minor inconvenience. Through their cameras they watched as Jinho stood completely still in the midst of wind that should have thrown him across the landscape. Rain that was dissolving their shuttle's outer coating struck his exposed skin without any visible effect. Lightning illuminated his features, revealing a bipedal mammalian appearance with forward-facing eyes and what appeared to be some kind of primitive covering over parts of his body. But what truly horrified the coalition crew was what happened next. Jinho opened what was clearly his breathing orifice and took a deep, deliberate breath of the toxic atmosphere. The poisonous mixture of gases that was slowly killing their equipment went directly into his respiratory system. And then he smiled. Not grimaced in pain, not gasped in shock, not collapsed in convulsions. He smiled as if breathing concentrated poison was the most natural thing in the universe. Tordan made a choking sound that might have been a prayer to his ancestors. "How?" whispered Velnara, though she wasn't sure if she was asking her crew or the universe itself. More figures appeared through the storm, all moving with the same impossible ease through conditions that should have been instantly fatal. Men and women, young and old, all breathing poison air and walking through acid rain as if they were strolling through a pleasant garden. The coalition crew realized they weren't just witnessing first contact with an unknown species. They were witnessing something that challenged every assumption they had about life itself. Dr. Minseo walked ahead of the coalition team with an easy confidence that made Captain Velnara's stomach churn. The human moved through his settlement as if he owned the world, completely unbothered by the toxic air that was slowly eating through their protective suits. Every step he took on the bare ground should have been dangerous. Their scanners showed the soil contained heavy metals and acidic compounds that would burn through most species' feet in minutes. "Please follow me," Minseo said cheerfully, leading them down what he called a street, but which looked more like a pathway through organized chaos. "I know this might seem overwhelming at first, but you'll get used to it." "Get used to it." Velnara almost laughed. They were walking through what their instruments registered as an active chemical disaster zone, and this creature was treating it like a casual neighborhood tour. The first shock came when they rounded a corner and encountered what their database immediately flagged as Class A predators. Massive creatures with powerful jaws, sharp teeth, and muscular bodies built for hunting bounded toward them at full speed. Lieutenant Hayara screamed inside her helmet and reached for her emergency beacon. "Oh, don't worry about them," Minseo said casually as if discussing the weather. "These are our companions, we call them dogs." The coalition crew watched in absolute horror as the predators, these dogs, reached them and began making friendly noises. Instead of attacking, they were wagging their posterior appendages and making what sounded like joyful vocalizations. Several humans emerged from nearby structures and began touching the dangerous creatures with their bare hands. "This is Buddy," said a human female, scratching behind the ears of a beast that weighed nearly as much as she did. "He's a golden retriever, very gentle with children." Tordan's scanner was practically screaming warnings. "Captain," he whispered through their comm system, "that creature's bite force registers at over 200 pounds per square inch. It could snap our bones like twigs." Yet they watched as a small human, apparently a juvenile of their species, ran up to the massive predator and wrapped its tiny arms around the creature's neck. The dog responded by gently licking the child's face with what had to be a chemically dangerous tongue. "We've been companions for thousands of years," Minseo explained, apparently not noticing how his guests had frozen in terror. "Dogs help us hunt, guard our homes, and provide emotional support. They're part of our families." Families. These humans lived with apex predators in their homes, and considered them family members. Chief Engineer Kess made a sound that might have been sobbing. But the tour was just beginning. Minseo led them to what he called the Market District, where the revelations became even more impossible to accept. Humans were openly handling and consuming substances that their scanners classified as industrial toxins. "And this is lunch," announced another human named Hejin, approaching them with a container full of what looked like a chemical weapon. "The peppers are especially good today. Would you like to try some?" She held out small, colorful objects that made their hazmat detectors go crazy. Tordan's reading showed concentrated capsaicin compounds, the same chemicals their species used for non-lethal crowd control weapons. The levels were so high they could cause permanent tissue damage to most coalition species. "Those are weapons-grade chemical irritants," Tordan stammered. Hyejin looked confused for a moment, then burst into laughter. "Oh, you mean the spice? Yes, these are quite hot. I grew them myself." To demonstrate, she bit into one of the peppers directly. Her eyes watered slightly, but she continued chewing with obvious pleasure. The coalition team watched in stunned silence as other humans gathered around market stalls, purchasing and consuming various items that registered as toxic on their instruments. Crystalline substances that should have shut down nervous systems, plant matter containing natural pesticides, processed foods with preservatives that would have been classified as embalming chemicals on any civilized world. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery came when they witnessed humans engaging in what could only be described as recreational poisoning. A group of adults sat around a table, laughing and socializing, while consuming a clear liquid that their scanners identified as ethanol, a solvent used for cleaning equipment and sterilizing medical instruments. "It's happy hour," explained a human named Dongyun, raising his glass of industrial solvent in a toast. "Would you like to join us for a drink?" Their xenobiologist, Dr. Theta-7, finally couldn't handle any more. The synthetic being, designed to study alien life forms under extreme conditions, simply shut down. Its systems couldn't process the contradiction between what it was seeing and what should have been possible. "The ethanol concentration is 12%, Tordan reported in a shaking voice. "That's enough to preserve biological specimens indefinitely. They're drinking embalming fluid for entertainment." But the humans weren't just surviving these toxins. They were clearly enjoying them. They laughed more freely as they consumed more of the poison. Their social behaviors became more animated and relaxed. Somehow their bodies were not only processing the deadly chemicals but using them to enhance their mental states. Minseo noticed their distress and tried to reassure them. "I know it seems strange, but alcohol has been part of human culture for thousands of years. It helps us relax and socialize. The key is moderation, of course." Moderation. He was discussing the moderate consumption of industrial solvents as if it were normal dietary advice. As they continued through the settlement, the revelations kept coming. Humans exercising in the deadly solar radiation they called sunshine. Children playing games that involved controlled violence and simulated combat. Adults deliberately exposing themselves to extreme temperatures for something they called relaxation. Every single aspect of human existence violated the basic principles of survival that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. These creatures weren't just surviving on a death world. They had turned survival into an art form, transforming every deadly aspect of their environment into tools for living better, stronger, happier lives. Velnara realized they weren't just witnessing an impossible adaptation. They were seeing evolution's ultimate success story, a species that had learned to thrive by embracing exactly the things that should have destroyed them. The Coalition rescue fleet arrived at Sol 3 expecting to find wreckage and corpses. Admiral Thexnor had brought body recovery specialists and grief counselors, not diplomats. In 3 centuries of space exploration, no one had ever survived more than a few hours on the death world. Captain Velnara's team had been missing for 6 days, but when the Harmony's Grace entered orbit, they received an impossible transmission. Velnara's voice came through clearly, stronger and healthier than when she had left Coalition space a week earlier. "Admiral, this is Captain Velnara reporting. My crew is alive and well. We're ready for pickup, but we're bringing guests. Admiral Thexnor stared at his communications officer in disbelief. Run a medical scan on that transmission. Check for signs of distress, coercion, or mental breakdown. The results came back. Normal. More than normal, actually. Velnara's vital signs showed lower stress levels and better overall health than when she had departed. It was as if the death world had somehow made her stronger. When the shuttle docked with the flagship, Admiral Thexnor barely recognized Velnara's team. They moved with new confidence, their scales brighter, their eyes clearer. Most shocking of all, they were accompanied by several of the impossible, beings from Sol 3. Dr. Sunho stepped forward from the human delegation, completely at ease despite being surrounded by alien technology in the vacuum of space. He wore only a simple environmental suit that looked primitive compared to Coalition equipment, yet he seemed perfectly comfortable. "Admiral," Velnara said, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Sunho and his colleagues. They're the reason we're alive." The human doctor smiled with genuine warmth. "Your crew arrived in pretty rough shape. Radiation poisoning, atmospheric toxicity, severe stress reactions. Nothing we haven't seen before, though." Admiral Thexnor's medical officer, Commander Yis, stepped forward with her scanner ready. "Impossible. Our equipment showed lethal levels of contamination when they landed. They should have required months of intensive treatment." Dr. Sunho gestured casually to one of his companions, a human female named Yunji who carried what appeared to be a simple medical bag. Yunji here treated them with some basic remedies: activated charcoal for the toxins, some herbal supplements for the radiation exposure, and a few days of rest. Standard emergency medicine. Standard emergency medicine. The Coalition medical team exchanged horrified glances. Their most advanced medical technology couldn't have saved Velnara's crew from that level of contamination, yet these humans had done it with what they called basic remedies. Dr. Sunho continued, seemingly unaware of the shock he was causing. "Your species is fascinating to us. You've built an entire civilization based on avoiding challenges. Perfect climate control, sterilized environments, filtered air, processed foods. You've eliminated every possible source of stress or danger from your lives." He paused, looking thoughtful. "We took the opposite approach. We built our civilization by embracing challenge." Through the viewport, Earth hung below them like a blue-green storm. Lightning flickered across continents, and spiral cloud formations that could swallow entire moons churned through the atmosphere. Even from space, the planet looked angry and alive. "Every single day here is a test," Dr. Sunho explained, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and matter-of-fact acceptance. "Our weather systems could destroy your cities in minutes. Our predators hunt in packs and can track prey across continents. Our plants produce toxins that would kill most species instantly. Even our water isn't safe to drink without the right preparation." Commander Yis interrupted, her voice shaking. "How do you survive? How do you even function in such conditions?" Dr. Sunho smiled again, but this time there was something almost predatory in the expression. "We don't just survive, Commander. We thrive. Our immune systems aren't just defense mechanisms. They're biological weapons that can adapt to almost any threat. Our minds don't break under trauma. They process it, learn from it, and become stronger." Another human stepped forward. Captain Borum wore what appeared to be a military uniform, though it looked almost casual compared to Coalition battle gear. His presence filled the room with quiet authority that made even Admiral Thexnor straighten unconsciously. "We've been watching your ships pass through our system for decades," Captain Borum said calmly. "Long-range sensors, monitoring your communications, tracking your flight patterns. We've known about your Coalition for quite some time." The admission hit the assembled Coalition officers like a physical blow. They had been observed, studied, cataloged by beings they didn't even know existed. "Why didn't you make contact?" Admiral Thexnor managed to ask. Captain Borum's expression grew almost apologetic. "Honestly, we assumed you were too fragile to survive meaningful interaction with us. Your technology shows incredible sophistication, but it's all designed to protect you from challenge. Your social structures, your medicine, your exploration protocols, everything about your civilization suggests species that need constant protection from their environment." He gestured toward Velnara's crew, who were standing straighter and looking more alert than any coalition crew the Admiral had ever seen. "We were worried that direct contact might accidentally harm you. Your people nearly died just from breathing our air for a few hours." Dr. Sunho nodded agreement. "Our children play games that would be considered military training exercises by your standards. Our elderly routinely survive conditions that challenge your strongest warriors. We weren't being arrogant. We genuinely thought we might accidentally kill you by existing in the same space." The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence. The Coalition, with all their advanced technology and thousands of member worlds, had been deemed too delicate for first contact by a species that lived on a single death world. "Our technology works in conditions that destroy yours because it has to," Captain Borum continued. "Our equipment is battle-tested every day against an environment that actively tries to break it. Our people are the same way." Admiral Thexnor looked around at his crew, seeing them with new eyes, soft beings who lived in climate-controlled environments, breathing filtered air and eating processed foods that couldn't possibly harm them. Creatures who needed protection from everything their universe could throw at them. Then he looked at the humans standing calmly in the heart of an alien warship, completely unafraid and somehow making everyone around them feel safer just by being there. They hadn't discovered a lost colony or contacted a primitive species. They had found apex predators who had been quietly watching them for decades, being so perfectly adapted to survival that they worried about accidentally breaking the fragile aliens who came to visit. The galaxy's greatest mystery wasn't how humans had survived Earth. It was how anything else had survived without them. The transformation happened faster than anyone in the Coalition had thought possible. Within 12 months of first contact, everything they knew about exploration and colonization had been turned upside down. Worlds that had sat empty for centuries because they were deemed too dangerous suddenly buzzed with activity. The impossible had become routine, and it all started with humans doing what they did best, making the deadly seem simple. Engineer Tae-hyun stood on the crystalline surface of Kepler 442b, a world that had been written off as uninhabitable for over 200 years. The atmosphere was thick with ammonia compounds that would have dissolved Coalition equipment in hours. The temperature swung between extremes that could freeze nitrogen solid or boil lead. Yet here he was, wearing nothing more than work clothes and a breathing mask that looked like it had been built in someone's garage. "The trick," Tae-hyun explained to the mixed group of alien engineers around him, "is not to fight the environment. Work with it instead." Around him, creatures from a dozen different worlds watched in amazement as he demonstrated techniques that violated every safety protocol they had ever learned. A Corellian engineer, whose species had never set foot on a world without full environmental suits, was learning to operate machinery with nothing but basic protective gear. A Vorthan technician, whose people required sterile conditions for any complex work, was assembling delicate electronics while ammonia snow fell around him. "But the chemical reactions," protested Engineer Velthok, a four-armed specialist whose species had spent thousands of years perfecting sealed environment technology. "The atmospheric composition should corrode our tools within hours." Tae-hyun grinned and held up a wrench that looked ancient compared to Coalition tools, but showed no signs of wear, despite weeks of use in the hostile environment. "Human metallurgy. We've been dealing with corrosive environments for so long that building things to last in bad conditions is second nature. This wrench is made from steel alloys we developed to survive Earth's ocean floors. Your fancy tools are designed for perfect conditions. Ours are designed for the worst possible conditions." The paradigm shift wasn't just technological. Back on Earth, orbital training stations that had been hastily constructed to meet overwhelming demand were filled with alien students learning concepts that challenged everything they thought they knew about survival. Professor Nyon stood before a classroom filled with beings from across Coalition space. Corellians, Vorthans, Hern, Zalaki, and dozens of other species sat in what humans casually called mild conditions, but which registered as extreme environment, training on most Coalition worlds. The humidity was 35%, high enough to cause respiratory distress in several species. The temperature fluctuated naturally as Earth's day-night cycle progressed. There was no climate control, No air filtration, no environmental protection at all. Today we're going to discuss fear, Professor Neon announced, her voice carrying easily through the humid air that several of her students found difficult to breathe. Your species have spent millennia trying to eliminate fear from your lives. Perfect environments, predictable conditions, complete safety. But fear isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. A young Hern student raised one of his manipulator arms. Professor, my people have achieved near-perfect environmental control. We haven't experienced true fear in over 3,000 years. Why would we want to invite it back? Neon smiled with the patient expression of someone who had answered this question hundreds of times. Because fear is information. It tells you about limits you didn't know you had, strengths you didn't know you possessed. When you eliminate all fear, you eliminate all growth. She gestured toward the viewport, where Earth hung below them, storms visible even from orbit. Every human child grows up learning to read the signs of danger in our environment. Not so they can hide from it, but so they can navigate it safely. We don't see a thunderstorm and run for shelter. We see it and decide whether we need an umbrella, or if we can work around it. The classroom fell silent as alien minds struggled to process this concept. The idea of not immediately seeking maximum protection from danger was fundamentally alien to most coalition species. Let's try a simple exercise, Neon continued. I want everyone to remove their environmental support devices for 60 seconds. Panic rippled through the classroom. Several students immediately activated emergency beacons. The idea of removing life support equipment voluntarily was beyond their comprehension. Professor, stammered a Corellian student, that could be fatal. The atmospheric composition here is completely unregulated. The atmospheric composition here is what we call normal, Neon replied gently. Billions of humans breathe this air every day without any support equipment at all. Your bodies are more adaptable than you think. You've just never been allowed to discover that. One by one, with tremendous courage, the alien students began removing breathing apparatus and environmental suits. What they discovered challenged every assumption they had about their own limitations. They could breathe Earth's air. They could handle the temperature variations. They could survive in conditions their civilizations had taught them were impossible. Similar scenes were playing out across coalition space. On mining worlds where toxic gases had made extraction impossible, human-trained teams were pulling resources from places that had been written off as too dangerous. On research stations studying hostile environments, mixed-species crews were gathering data that had been impossible to collect safely before. The economic impact was staggering. Worlds that had been considered worthless because of environmental hazards suddenly became valuable. Resources that had been unreachable became accessible. Entire industries sprung up around human-designed equipment and human-taught techniques for surviving in conditions that had previously been lethal. But perhaps the most profound change was psychological. For thousands of years, coalition species had built their civilizations around the principle that the universe was fundamentally hostile, and that survival meant perfect protection from that hostility. Humans had proved that survival could mean something entirely different. Not protection from challenge, but adaptation to it. The universe isn't trying to kill you, Professor Nyan told her students as they completed their first successful, hour-long exposure to unfiltered Earth atmosphere. It's trying to make you stronger. Every challenge is an opportunity to discover capabilities you didn't know you had. You just have to stop running from the challenge long enough to listen to what it's teaching you. Her students looked around at each other with new understanding. They had just survived an hour in conditions their species had classified as lethal. They were still alive, still healthy, and most remarkably, they felt stronger than when they had started. The galaxy's most feared world had become its most valuable classroom. The species everyone had thought were impossible survivors had become the teachers of what it truly meant to be alive, in a universe full of infinite possibilities rather than infinite dangers. Humanity hadn't just survived Earth, they had learned to dance with it, and now they were teaching the rest of the galaxy how to dance too.